"Get this man out of my seat. People like him don't belong up here." The words cut through the quiet hum of the business class car before the train had even left Union Station. Every head turned. Kieran Hartwell had been watching the morning light move across the CN Tower through the window, one hand resting on his daughter Sadie's sketchbook while she traced the roofline of the station platform. They had been seated for 11 minutes. Seats 3A and 3B, business class, via rail train 33 to Ottawa. He had the confirmation in his coat pocket, printed the night before while Sadie was asleep, because years of field work had made him keep paper copies of everything. The woman standing over him was tall and immaculately put together, a fitted charcoal blazer, pearl earrings, the kind of composure that came not from genuine confidence but from long practice at making other people feel small. Her name was Philippa Drummond. Kieran did not know that yet. He would learn it from the placard on her leather portfolio case, which her assistant was already lifting into the overhead compartment. "This is my seat," Philippa said again, not to Kieran but to the attendant nearest the door. Her voice carried the exact pitch of someone who had never once been told no and found the concept genuinely confusing. Teresa Wren, the senior attendant responsible for business class, moved quickly up the aisle. She glanced at Philippa's ticket. Seat 5A, farther back in the car, window side, no ambiguity, and then at Kieran's confirmation slip, which clearly showed 3A. For one clear moment, she saw exactly what the situation was. Then she looked at the Drummond Logistics logo on the portfolio case, and the moment passed. "There may have been an issue with the seat assignment," Teresa said, though she knew there hadn't been. Kieran looked up from the window. He didn't raise his voice. "We were assigned these seats when the booking was confirmed. Sadie, can you show the attendant your copy?" Sadie closed her sketchbook and held out the second printed confirmation. Seat 3B, her name, the same booking reference. She was 10 years old and had her mother's habit of keeping things organized. Philippa didn't look at either document. She looked at Kieran's worn fleece jacket, at the scuff marks on his boots, at the battered canvas duffel tucked beneath the seat. "People can print whatever they like at home," she said. "I requested this specific row weeks ago. It has the best light." "Your request doesn't change a confirmed reservation," Kieran said. Teresa's expression shifted, not because Kieran had said anything unreasonable, but because he had said it calmly, in front of a passenger she recognized as someone with purchasing power. She asked him to step into the vestibule so they could sort things out without disrupting the other passengers. Kieran looked at Sadie, who was watching the exchange with the careful attention of a child who already understood more than adults assumed. He told Teresa he was happy to speak with her, but he wasn't going to leave his 10-year-old daughter sitting alone while he did it. Teresa ignored the point. She called the duty manager. Martin Reyes arrived from the platform 3 minutes later, already moving at the clipped pace of someone who had decided to be irritated before he knew what he was being irritated about. Teresa spoke to him first, quietly, near the door, and Martin's eyes moved to Philippa's portfolio, to the Drummond Logistics name, and then to Kieran's jacket. He did not ask Kieran for his version. He did not review the booking history. He looked at the seat assignment on his tablet, noticed that Teresa had already reclassified Kieran's booking as a duplicate error, and nodded once. "VI Rail reserves the right to manage seating for operational purposes," Martin told Kieran. "We can find you and your daughter seats in the standard class cars. I can offer you a travel credit as a courtesy." "I'd like to see the operational reason in writing," Kieran said. Martin's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works." "Then explain how it does work. Because what I'm observing is a confirmed booking being reclassified after a wealthier passenger requested our row. Sir, I'd ask you not to make this more difficult than it needs to be." Philippa folded her arms. "It's a seat on a train," she said, "not a matter of principle. If he truly belonged in business class, he'd understand how these things are handled." Several passengers looked away. One man in the row behind lifted his phone as though checking messages. Sadie had gone very still beside Kieran. Her sketchbook was closed in her lap again. She was looking at the floor. "Hey," Kieran said quietly, just to her, "keep breathing." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. He looked at Teresa's name badge. He noted the time on the car clock. He looked at Martin's lanyard ID. Then he stood. He helped Sadie put on her backpack and picked up his duffel. As he stepped into the aisle, Philippa moved aside with the restrained satisfaction of someone who had expected exactly this outcome and found it entirely natural. "Next time," she said, loudly enough that the nearest rows could hear, "book something that matches your situation." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke. Kieran paused beside Teresa. He did not raise his voice. Reclassifying a confirmed booking without the passenger's consent isn't a seating preference, he said. It's a modification of an official record. Martin stepped between them. Keep moving, please. Kieran obeyed. He walked Sadie toward the vestibule, through the connecting door, into the narrow space between cars where the mechanical noise was louder and the air smelled of metal and brake dust. Sadie stood close to him, both hands gripping her backpack straps. They thought we were lying, she said. They didn't think about it long enough to form an opinion, Kieran said. Why didn't you show them something? Something that would have made them listen. Kieran crouched slightly so he was at her eye level. Through the small window in the door behind her, he could see Teresa smoothing the headrest cover on 3A before Philippa settled into it. Because if people only treat us fairly after they learn something about me, he said, then they were never treating us fairly. They were managing risk. Sadie looked at him for a long moment. That doesn't feel like enough. It isn't, he agreed, but what happened back there, it matters for more reasons than us. He straightened and looked toward the vestibule door. Martin had followed them out and was speaking to a platform employee through the exterior door, searching for 2 available seats in the standard class cars. The train's departure had already been delayed by 4 minutes. Kieran watched the employee scroll through the seating grid on her handheld device. He could see enough of the screen to understand exactly what he was looking at. His original booking had not simply been flagged as a system error. His name had been removed from 3A and reclassified as an unallocated business class record. Sadie's seat in 3B remained active under a separate status. The effect on paper was that a father and his daughter would be recorded as traveling separately, and that the separation appeared to have originated from a technical anomaly rather than from a staff decision. No one had asked Kieran to consent to that change. No one had documented the reason. He asked Martin whether the modification had been recorded as a voluntary adjustment. Martin stepped between Kieran and the device. Internal records aren't your concern. You've moved a minor child away from her only parent, Kieran said. I'm asking whether anyone recorded why. The matter has been handled. It's been concealed. Those are different things. Martin accused him of turning a routine matter into something adversarial. Kieran did not respond to the word adversarial. He asked the platform employee quietly, and without theater, not to make any further changes to the record. Martin laughed and told him he had no authority to give instructions to Via Rail staff. At that moment, the vestibule door at the far end of the car opened. Alistair Prentice was walking toward them with 2 operations supervisors behind him. He was the VP of Operations for Via Rail's Ontario Corridor, and had been conducting an unannounced review of service performance on Train 33 when he received word that a departure hold was running due to a seating dispute. He had expected to find a confused passenger or a staffing miscommunication. Instead, he found Kieran Hartwell standing in a vestibule with a 10-year-old girl holding his hand. Alistair stopped. His expression moved through several things very quickly: recognition, confusion, and then a quiet alarm that he was careful not to show to anyone standing near him. Mr. Hartwell, he said. Martin turned, already forming an objection. Alistair did not look at Martin. He looked at Kieran, and then at Sadie, and then at the open car door behind them, through which seat 3A was clearly occupied by someone who had not purchased it. Can you tell me, Alistair said carefully, why the chair of Via Rail's board is standing in a vestibule while another passenger is sitting in his confirmed seat? The platform employee froze. One supervisor straightened immediately. The other looked at Martin. Martin's face lost all color. Kieran did not answer Alistair's question directly. He gestured toward the employee's device and asked 3 things: whether a confirmed business class booking could be reclassified without the passenger's written consent, whether a child could be recorded as traveling separately from her guardian without documented approval, and whether a duty manager could authorize a record modification without logging an operational reason. Alistair's eyes moved to Martin. Martin opened his mouth and produced nothing. Kieran asked whether the original booking record could still be recovered in its unmodified state. Alistair confirmed it could. Every change would be time-stamped against the employee account that made it. Kieran asked whether Train 33 could legally depart with a manifest containing an unauthorized modification. Alistair understood the implication immediately. Martin found his voice. He said the situation had been a misunderstanding under time pressure. He said Kieran and Sadie were about to be reseated, and that there was no reason to escalate the matter. Kieran looked at him without anger. I'm not asking for my seat back, he said. Martin looked confused. Kieran continued. He asked whether Teresa had verified Philippa's booking before reclassifying his reservation. He asked whether Martin had reviewed the original booking history before approving the change. He asked whether either of them had confirmed that the revised manifest matched the passengers physically sitting in those seats. Martin admitted he had acted on Teresa's summary. Alastair looked through the car door, and something in his face settled into a kind of tired seriousness. Kieran instructed him to lock the booking records immediately, preserve every version of the passenger's manifest, and prevent any further modifications. He ordered the departure suspended until the full record could be independently reviewed. He asked that Rachel Tremblay, Via Rail's Director of Legal and Compliance, be reached before anyone was cleared to proceed. Martin reminded Alastair that a suspension meant delays, missed connections, and real cost. Kieran answered that a falsified passenger record was a more serious problem than an inconvenient schedule. If the manifest didn't match the people on the train, the document wasn't a manifest, it was a fiction. Alastair took out his phone and began making calls. One supervisor moved back toward the platform. The other went to the duty desk and flagged the departure hold as formal. Martin stood without moving, listening to the train he had tried to protect from delay being placed on a full operational hold. In the business class car, Teresa received a message through the attendant system. She read it twice. She looked toward Philippa, who was already checking her watch with the focused irritation of someone who billed time by the quarter hour. Teresa informed her that operations had placed the departure on hold pending a records review. Philippa demanded to know why. Teresa said she hadn't been given a reason. Philippa accused the service staff of incompetence and mentioned, not quietly, that Drummond Logistics was currently evaluating carriers for a national freight agreement, and that first impressions shaped those decisions. Teresa tried to reassure her, but the composure she had shown while reclassifying Kieran's seat was gone. She checked her tablet and found that the booking system had locked her access. Every attempt to open the manifest returned the same frozen status. She looked toward the vestibule door, expecting Martin to restore things to normal, but Martin did not appear. 9 minutes after Kieran had been walked out of seat 3A, the PA system in the train activated. Passengers were informed that Train 33 would not be departing on its current schedule. An operational review was underway. All passengers were asked to collect their belongings and exit through the platform doors in an orderly fashion. The reaction moved through the car in a wave. Business class passengers asked each other what had happened. A woman near the window assumed a mechanical fault. 2 men near the galley whispered about a security concern. Someone in the middle began recording on their phone. Philippa refused to stand. She told Teresa she would remain until someone provided a coherent explanation, that she had a board meeting in Ottawa she could not delay, and that she held Drummond Logistics travel agreements personally. Teresa repeated more quietly that everyone was required to exit. Philippa pointed toward Kieran's printed confirmation, still sitting on the armrest. She had never once looked at the name printed on it, and said the disruption had begun the moment the disruptive passenger was removed, and that someone ought to connect those facts. Teresa said nothing. One by one, the passengers filed out. Philippa eventually rose. She moved through the car with her chin level, every step calibrated to convey that she was leaving because she chose to, not because she had been asked. She stepped onto the platform and stopped. Kieran was no longer standing alone in a vestibule. He stood on the platform with Sadie beside him, but surrounding him were Alastair Prentice, Rachel Tremblay, who had arrived from the Via Rail offices on Front Street within 15 minutes. 2 members of the compliance team and 3 senior station managers who were waiting for direction rather than offering it. Martin stood several meters apart, pale and motionless. The passengers emerging from the train slowed. Their complaints faded into murmuring. Those who had looked past Kieran on the train now studied the people standing beside him. Alastair turned toward the platform and spoke Kieran's name and title. The words moved through the crowd like a change in air pressure. Philippa stopped in the middle of the platform walkway. Her eyes moved from Kieran's worn fleece jacket to Alastair, to Rachel Tremblay's compliance lanyard, to the assembled management standing around a man she had assumed, without any evidence whatsoever, had no standing worth considering. For the first time since boarding, she had nothing to say. Martin Reyes moved toward Kieran before the platform had fully cleared. The color had gone entirely from his face. He lowered his voice and said the situation had been a genuine misunderstanding, that he had never intended to disrespect Kieran or Sadie, that he had acted only to prevent a departure delay, and then, in his panic, he said the one thing that could not be retrieved. If I had known you were the board chair, I would have handled this completely differently. Kieran looked at him for a long moment. Sadie was still at his side, still holding his hand. That, Kieran said quietly, is exactly the problem. Martin tried to correct himself. Kieran continued. The boarding confirmation had been valid before Alistair recognized him. Sadie had been a child traveling with her father before anyone knew who he was. The rules protect passengers had not become more important because the board chair was involved. They had always applied. The only thing that had changed was whether someone had bothered to honor them. Martin said he had trusted Teresa's account and believed the reclassification was necessary. Kieran asked what operational necessity required moving a paying passenger from a confirmed business class seat, recording the change as a system error, and creating a manifest that showed a child traveling apart from her father. Martin had no answer. He glanced toward Philippa as though she might say something in his favor. Philippa did not move. Rachel opened a portable compliance terminal at the duty desk while Alistair secured the surrounding area. She requested the original booking file, the current manifest, the staff access log, and every modification made between the time Kieran boarded and the time the departure was suspended. The original booking showed Kieran Hartwell assigned to 3A, Sadie Hartwell to 3B, confirmed and paid. Philippa Drummond's ticket showed seat 5A, a different row entirely. There was no duplicate booking, no system error, no flag of any kind. Rachel opened the modification log. Teresa's employee account had reclassified Kieran's seat within the 10 minutes before the scheduled departure. She had moved him to an unallocated status and transferred Philippa into 3A. She had then applied the notation indicating the original passenger had accepted the reassignment voluntarily. No consent had been recorded, no signature, no documented acknowledgement. Rachel looked at Teresa and asked when Kieran had agreed to the change. Teresa said she had understood his decision to stand and move to the aisle as agreement. Rachel reminded her that Kieran had stood only after being told that security would remove him if he continued to resist. Compliance standards did not allow an employee to record coerced compliance as voluntary consent. Teresa said she had been under pressure and was trying to keep the boarding calm. Rachel asked why she had not verified Philippa's booking before reclassifying Kieran's confirmed reservation. Teresa said Philippa was a high-value client and had indicated the front row had been specifically requested in advance. Rachel pointed to the booking history. The request had never been approved. There was no record, no flag, no notation of any priority assignment for row 3. She then opened the authorization log. Martin's manager account had approved Teresa's modification less than 90 seconds after it was entered. There was no evidence he had reviewed Kieran's boarding confirmation, spoken with him, investigated the booking history, or considered the effect of separating a child from her traveling parent. A younger attendant named Bridget, who had been working the vestibule door during boarding, raised her hand when Rachel asked whether any staff member had seen the original manifest before the reclassification. Teresa turned sharply toward her. Alistair told Bridget to speak freely. Bridget explained that the car's tablet had briefly lost connectivity during boarding. She had photographed the seating display on her own phone as a backup, in case she needed to verify meal orders manually if the system failed again. The photograph was time-stamped before the modification. It showed Kieran in 3A, Sadie in 3B, Philippa in her assigned seat at 5A. Bridget also had a second image taken 6 minutes later, after Teresa had updated the record. The difference was clear and direct. Rachel asked whether Bridget had witnessed any exchange between Philippa and Teresa before the reclassification. Bridget hesitated, then she said yes. Philippa had approached Teresa near the galley and mentioned that Drummond Logistics was in active discussion with 2 carriers about a national distribution contract. She had said that attendants who understood the needs of significant clients tended to be remembered when internal recommendations were made. Teresa had acknowledged Kieran's boarding confirmation as valid before that conversation. After it, she had described the situation to Martin as a possible system error. Philippa stepped forward and said Bridget was misrepresenting a casual professional remark. She had never instructed anyone to falsify a record. She had simply expected the standard of service appropriate to a passenger of her standing. Rachel replied that the investigation would determine the extent of Philippa's involvement. Her standing did not alter what had occurred. The man who had been recording on his phone during the original confrontation approached Alistair and offered the footage. Rachel reviewed it on the platform. It showed Kieran seated quietly beside Sadie. It showed Teresa acknowledging his confirmation slip and then setting it down without acting on it. It showed Philippa examining Kieran's jacket before she had spoken a single word to Teresa. It captured Philippa's remark about booking something that matched his situation. It captured Sadie lowering her eyes to the floor. The passengers who had watched and said nothing now avoided both Kieran's gaze and each other's. Philippa did not apologize. Instead, she told Kieran he was allowing a minor inconvenience to become a public event out of wounded pride, and reminded him that a freight agreement worth tens of millions of dollars was still under negotiation with Via Rail. If he chose to humiliate her in front of passengers and staff, she warned, the agreement would be withdrawn, and the board would hear her account of why it had happened. Kieran's expression did not change. He said that a contract requiring staff to falsify passenger records and demean ordinary travelers was not an agreement Via Rail should be pursuing. He said that a company that leveraged its purchasing power to override safety documentation was not a partner the railway needed. Philippa told him he was being emotional because his daughter had witnessed the incident. He said Sadie's presence made the failure more painful but had not created it. The record would have been false whether the displaced passenger was the board chair, a nurse, a student, or someone riding the corridor for the first time. The standard did not shift based on who happened to be watching. Rachel formally suspended Philippa's premium traveler status pending review of her involvement in the incident. Philippa moved toward the platform exits. 2 station managers stepped quietly into her path. She looked around at the passengers gathered on the platform, at the staff who had watched her take Kieran's seat an hour ago, and who now stood on the other side of a very different situation and understood that no one was going to defend her position. Security walked her and her assistant toward the station offices. The charcoal blazer and pearl earrings were easy to follow across the platform. No one who had been on that train would have any difficulty describing her. Rachel turned to Teresa. She revoked Teresa's authority to work the service and placed her employee access on suspension pending full review. Teresa began to cry. She said she had spent 8 years building her record with the railway. She said she hadn't meant for it to go this far. Kieran did not offer comfort, but he offered no cruelty either. He told her that 8 years made the choice worse, not better, because she had known the rules and set them aside to please someone with money. She handed over her tablet and stepped back from the door. Martin remained nearby, still hoping proximity might somehow help his position. Rachel pulled the compliance archive and found what she was looking for within minutes. Martin's office had received 4 formal complaints about seat disputes over the previous 2 years, 3 of which involved families being separated or moved to accommodate passengers who appeared more commercially valuable. 2 had been closed without recorded interviews. 1 had been filed and marked resolved with no supporting documentation whatsoever. Martin said those cases had lacked sufficient evidence. Rachel said he had not lacked evidence, he had avoided looking for it. Alistair formally suspended Martin from all station duties and ordered his system access disabled. Martin looked at Kieran and asked for the chance to make his case to someone who might be more willing to listen. Kieran said the review process would give him exactly that opportunity, but Martin would no longer control the records or the staff who might be called to give testimony. Martin surrendered his lanyard. The platform was quieter now. The morning rush crowd had moved on or was watching from a polite distance. Sadie stood beside Kieran with her sketchbook open. She had taken it out at some point during the last half hour, and he saw that she had drawn the interior of the station, the long arched glass ceiling, the pale winter light coming through the panes, the pigeons moving along the upper beam. She had got the proportions right. She always got the details right. Kieran stood before the displaced passengers without notes, without his title, and without standing behind anyone. He apologized for the delay. He explained that the train could not depart with a manifest that had been altered without authorization. He said plainly that the railway had failed the people it existed to serve, and he did not soften that with qualifications. He took it as a statement of fact and let it stand. Via Rail arranged alternative departures for every affected passenger, provided meals and lounge access without anyone having to ask, and issued compensations the same day. The people who had watched Kieran's humiliation in the business class car found themselves, strangely, speaking to him now without the distance they had maintained on the train. The man with the recording apologized for filming while staying silent. A woman near the back of the crowd admitted she had decided before hearing a single fact about Kieran that he didn't belong in business class. Kieran accepted the apologies without ceremony, but he told them, without accusation, that silence in the presence of a wrong was not the same as having done nothing wrong. said that what had happened on the train had worked because the people watching had decided it was not their business. He said that the next person standing in that aisle might not have a VP of operations walking past at the right moment. Sadie listened to all of it. She understood that her father was not trying to shame anyone. He was asking them to remember. The internal review moved quickly because the records had been preserved the moment Kieran gave the instruction. Teresa's employment was terminated. Martin was dismissed following a fuller investigation that confirmed the pattern Rachel had identified in the closed complaint files. Bridget was formally commended for preserving the original seating evidence and for speaking truthfully when a senior colleague was under investigation. Kieran nominated her for Via Rail's operational leadership program and wrote the supporting letter himself, noting that honesty under professional pressure was rarer and more valuable than compliance without judgment. Before leaving Union Station, Kieran approved a series of operational directives. No staff member could reclassify a confirmed booking at the request of another passenger without documented justification, and the original passengers recorded consent. Any arrangement that separated a minor from a traveling parent required written approval from that parent. Complaints involving seat disputes would be reviewed by a body independent of local management. Staff would be formally protected from disciplinary action for refusing instructions that violated passenger rights. And board members and senior executives would be required to travel in standard class at unannounced intervals. So the service that ordinary passengers actually received was known through experience, not filtered upward through summary reports. When the next departure was ready, Alistair arranged for seats 3A and 3B to be held for Kieran and Sadie. On the platform before boarding, Kieran noticed an older woman near the back of the queue managing a wheeled walker and an overfull bag while trying to keep pace with the crowd ahead of her. A station employee stood 3 meters away and hadn't moved. The woman looked tired in the specific way of someone who had been tired since well before this morning. Kieran handed his boarding confirmation to Alistair. He asked him to give the woman seats 3A and 3B and to have her bag managed properly for the journey. Alistair offered to arrange another business class configuration. Kieran declined. He and Sadie boarded with the general queue and found 2 seats toward the rear of the standard class car. The seats faced a window. Outside, the rail yard spread westward in the gray morning light, tracks fanning outward in every direction from the station. Sadie settled in beside him and opened her sketchbook to a clean page. "You proved they were our seats," she said, "and then you gave them away." Kieran watched the yard outside. The seats were never really what it was about. What was it about, then? He thought about Martin's voice in the vestibule, "If I had known who you were." He thought about the 4 complaint files sitting quietly in a closed archive. He thought about whoever had been in those seats before him, people who had no title to invoke and no executive walking past at the precise moment they needed one. "Making sure the rules actually work," he said, "not just for us." Sadie looked toward the front of the car, toward the older woman now settling carefully into 3A, her walker folded and stowed beside her, her face easing into the particular relief of someone who has unexpectedly been given room, and then she leaned against her father's shoulder without saying anything else. The train pulled out of Union Station and moved east through the city, past the brick buildings and the flat gray winter waterfront, picking up speed as the corridor opened ahead of it toward Ottawa. By the time the skyline had disappeared behind them, Sadie was drawing again. The car was quiet the way a car gets quiet when the hardest part of the morning is behind everyone. Kieran watched the Ontario landscape begin to widen outside the window and understood that what had happened that morning was not a story about power being revealed at the right moment. It was a story about what power was actually for, not to lift the person who held it higher, but to repair quietly and without fanfare the things that had broken for everyone who didn't have it.